Hi there, Jay Uecker here at the Network Life Center in Louisville, Colorado, and I want to talk with you about disc herniation today. So I have here's your spine here, and we have 24 vertebrae in 24 bones in our spine here, and in between each of those bones is this intervertebral disc or this connective tissue pad. And what can happen is that the outer wall of that pad, that disc, can start to weaken over time, and that can result in a bulge where that disc starts to bulge, or actually where the insides of that disc, the internal material, starts to squirt out of it, and that can create this herniation. And the idea is that herniation puts pressure on these nerve roots here. And that kind of makes sense on some level. That putting pressure on the disc herniation, putting pressure on the nerves, would cause a problem, and certainly that does in some cases. And there's a lot of research that shows that actually that disc herniation doesn't necessarily equate to the symptoms and the pain that people often associate with disc herniation. And in fact, in one study, they examined a number of people randomly and found that 50% of the people who had disc herniations and didn't know it didn't have any symptoms. So it seems that there might be some other factors, at least, that are involved with the pain and the symptoms that go along with disc herniation. And I would suggest that at least one of the major factors, if not the factor, has to do with this sort of survival patterning that gets stored in our system from a very young age, and that I've talked about, that has to, that's a major source of a lot of the symptoms that we have in our body and life. That core survival pattern involves tension that we hold at the core of our system, where our system is sort of sequestering energy that's been deemed unsafe. It's using muscle tension to do that. And what happens is all this tension builds and pressure builds up in our pelvis and our low back and our belly. A lot of people have a lot of tension being stored in their pelvis, their low back, their belly, and they're kind of pushing all that part of their body to keep it separate from this part. And that creates all this pressure. And so it's like if you take two ice cream cones and stick them together, push the ice cream together, it squirts out the sides, right? Well, it's kind of the same way with our spine. That tension that we're holding in our body at a core level puts a lot of pressure on these discs and can predispose them to problems. And consequently, incidentally, where a lot of that pressure happens in our spine is in our low back and belly, and then also at the base of our neck. And that also happens to be where disc herniations tend to show up, most often in the lumbar spine, but then the second most common place for disc herniations is in the neck. And again, that's where a lot of times people are storing this tension, this pressure in their spine, in the lumbars and at the base of the neck. The other thing that happens is when our body stores this survival patterns in our system is we change our posture. And the reason why we're changing our posture is to stretch our spinal cord, because stretching our spinal cord decreases its ability to conduct especially emotional information. And so it's another way that we've learned that we can disconnect from things that have been deemed too painful to experience. And incidentally, again, the spinal cord floats freely everywhere else, but where it starts to anchor into the bones is up here at the base of the neck and here in the lumbar spine again. And so that pulling or stretching can tug on these nerve roots up here. And I would suggest that it's the tugging on the nerve roots that is actually pulling, that the pulling or stretching is sort of stretching those nerve roots across the herniation. And sure, when that's the case, if you remove the herniation, say with surgery, it could relieve some of that tension, but the core reason that that's happening is still there. All that pressure that's putting pressure on the disc, and then the stretching that's in the spinal cord is still there, so it's liable to show up as a number of different other problems. And so, from the perspective of the work that we do, I would suggest that maybe a better and more permanent solution would be to help your system sort of connect with and dissipate this tension that's being stored here, and relieve that pulling or stretching that's happening on the spinal cord. And we sort of specialize at that here at the Network Life Center. So if you found this useful or interesting, please like it or share it or leave a comment or pass it along to someone else who might need this information. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.